Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have some fun. So, second podcast with myself and Christian. Say hi, Christian.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you very much, Frank. How you doing today, man? We just had class together, actually.
Yes. Yeah, it was managerial accounting, actually. Quite far reached from what we're going to be talking about today, but nonetheless, its own strand of fun, I suppose.
I didn't like it at all.
I won't lie either. It's not my biggest, my best class. But yeah, I had a statistical modeling class right before, so my brain is pretty much mush right now. But I'll do my best.
We'll squeeze it for what it's got.
Yeah, exactly.
So just a little segue into what we're going to be talking about. Last time that we did a podcast together, we briefly got into Archetypes and Jordan Peterson and Carl Jung. And Frank and I have been talking. We've been planning on doing another podcast since then about archetypes. So, Frank, maybe if you can give us a little introduction to what that is, because I feel like most people today don't really. Yeah, maybe they do. I don't know.
Okay, I'll do my best. So, generally, the way things work is that for a larger population of individuals, certain individual traits start popping out, right? So you can make inferences about populations, and the larger the group is, the more inferences you can make about that population. So, for instance, I can make a general inference that I don't know, men are more tend towards disagreeableness and that women are more agreeable in general. So we base those traits on the big 5 psychological traits found by psychology and psychology majors as a whole. So
So when you're saying that there's a large population, and the larger the population, the more you can see certain patterns in behavior emerging, right? And those patterns in behavior eventually become, not eventually, but over time and over many, many years, like a lot of years, hundreds
thousands
of years.
And millions of years, yeah. Okay.
You see the same patterns emerging. And that could be, for example, that men are more disagreeable.
Right. So there are certain traits among certain populations. And what we got to understand is that, like, what you're referring to here is more in a Darwinistic context, involving biology and involving evolution as a whole. So you're kind of bringing those two ideas together. You're bringing psychology, which was formed by biology and our need to survive, and it's in constant conflict with our environment, right? So we have two different ways of seeing things. So we have the social view of things. It's more like, okay, so we're brought up from birth, and essentially everything that we are is given by all the events that has shaped our way of thinking and our being from our point of birth to where we are now to our point of death.
You wouldn't include everything that's happened before that as like a summation to where we are now as well?
Right. So the other perspective is more like biological perspective.
Okay. So that one we just said, the social perspective is everything that's happened from birth till now.
Right. That would be your own personality and your own uniqueness.
Okay. So is that on a more individual level?
That would be on but it's a constructionist perspective, so it's more along the lines of, in its essence, in its purest form, it is the assumption that you're a blank slate when you're born, and you're not born with any morality, and that essentially all your morality comes through time based on your decision and your environment. But there are certain characteristics of evolution that have come through time, that have evolved through our need for, like, for example, safety, for our need to reproduce, for our need to survive and eat.
So just to, because you're saying a lot of things there, like the first thing you're saying that people are kind of born as a blank slate.
No, that's the
social perspective.
The constructionist perspective assumption.
So that kind of means then people aren't inherently good.
Like,
or bad. It's
right. They're
like
morally
they're
neutral. Yeah, they're more like, essentially it says that they're morally neutral. So it goes a little bit hand in hand with something called nihilism, which essentially says that there is no purpose in the world. But there's also the other side of the coin, which is,
how does it go hand in hand with nihilism?
Nihilism being that there is that nothing exists for a reason.
Yeah.
So
why does the socialist go?
Okay, so the constructionist perspective. Constructionist perspective goes hand in hand with nihilism, because it says that there's no inherent morality in the human being. So essentially, that if you we're not born with any sense of morality, that nothing is intrinsically worth considering in the long term. So that would be a more like, pessimist way of things, of seeing things. So that would be, let's say that's one side of the coin.
And by long term, you mean in the next, like in your lifespan or future generations, or? Right.
So that's assuming that it's for each individual person, right?
Okay.
So it also says that individuals can't be brought together in groups. So the whole notion of statistics for a constructionist perspective is kind of thrown away, even if they use it as a tool. But I would like to just say, on the other side of the coin, we have ideas like biology and evolution, and what that does is that essentially the main drivers of our survival is what have formed our moral perspectives, right? So what's important to note is that those two constantly conflict, right? Because you do have your individual
and the individuality, or the group and the individual conflict.
Both.
Three.
You have your idea of who you are.
Yeah.
You have your idea of who you are with other people, which is your persona. Mm-hmm. You have the idea that people have towards you.
So
but
like
that's
how you think other people perceive you?
Yeah, exactly. But that's a little bit more complicated, and we can get to that later. What I would just want to say, so you have that constructionist perspective that's mostly environment related, and like essentially it goes hand in hand with the nihilistic perspective that perhaps human beings don't have inherent morality. Mm-hmm. And there is interesting philosophical points in looking at that perspective, but I truly believe that we do have an inherent morality, but I think that it's been shaped by our deep fundamental needs for certain things, and though that's when archetypes come in.
So the inherent morality that you say is shaped by those needs, like safety,
like
comfort,
safety, reproduction, ability to procreate, ability to survive in a dangerous environment.
So those needs came through basically survival,
right?
In order for us to survive before we reach the point where we can just sit a computer today.
And our morality is developing.
And it'll change, no? Do you think it'll change in the long run?
I think that, like, if it takes 100 million years to form the need for attachment and to have kids, and that it's deeply entrenched in the moral sphere of your person, it takes either a high moral plane or a very long time to detach yourself from that idea through multiple generations, right? So you can see the fact. Let's use a case in point here. You could see the fact that, for example, before humans were small in numbers and they wanted to procreate, right? They wanted to procreate because it showed that they survived in their environment and that they were able to reproduce and be successful in reproducing their genes over the long term. Now what's happening is that our environment is changing so much that we're in control of it, but we don't have that control over that urge to have children. So essentially that drive we still have. We still have that animalistic drive in our mammalian brain that pushes us to reproduce, but we don't view the moral and psychological and environmental threats that can pose over a long time. That's why you see
such a, like, what do you mean threats? Like how
like
can
threats like overpopulate,
like what is that overpopulation?
Like overpopulation, just the fact that we can overload our environment, and that before the assumption was that we couldn't overload our environment, right? So we keep going and having children and creating new beings that essentially in order to survive, they need to indulge, have food and water and basic needs. But as this goes further, we're further alienated by the fact that we need to be more aware of our environment. So that would be the more constructionist perspective again. So they do meet each other at a certain point. Yeah. But essentially, what it is that we're the makers of our own environment now, and our moral landscape hasn't followed where we need to go. So we're kind of too intelligent for our own understanding.
So it's like, if I'm going to try and sort of tell you what I'm understanding from what you're saying, and then you can tell me where I'm at with what you're trying to say. What I'm getting is like, so initially people have been like inherently the first human being. There was no good or bad. It was a bit of a blank slate, and through lots of time, people, through social needs and through their own needs to survive, they've developed a good like a morality that helps us survive as an individual and as a society. And as we've continued to develop, we've gotten to this point now where a lot of our needs no longer need to be met by other people, because we can sustain ourselves and survive. And
right, exactly.
too easily, and we've actually passed the point of needing
to
survive, right? Like, we can thrive now, or you can just barely survive, but it's pretty simple to do both.
Yeah, it depends.
And you're saying, like, so there's a lot of these deeper sort of urges and pushes. Archetypes that are still here, although we almost don't need them anymore. Not that we don't need them.
Not that we
don't need them to survive,
but they're so deeply entrenched.
They're we can't get away from
entrenched
them, right?
They're right, exactly. They're deeply entrenched in our psychological and morality, our psychological being and our morality as a whole. So what happens is that we try to influence our ability to make decisions in the immediacy, but we don't consider what has taken hundreds of millions of years to form. So, for example, there's an increasingly big contrast in society. For example, if we look at porn, okay? Porn has always been something special because I believe like 3 or 4% of the internet is porn, okay? That's a huge amount. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, there's been more and more of this social justice perspective, and that whole hashtag Me Too thing. Yeah. So there has been that increasing morality where we understand that there's been more and more abuse, but at the same time, the use of porn as a whole in society is going up. So it's kind of like our morality is conflicting with our deeper urges to do certain things that we can't do as moral beings, and that's ultimately what causes the problems in society is the friction of those two things.
Yeah, because we can't get away from these things, and in our society today, we don't really consider the archetypes anymore. And the archetypes, I think people used to consider them more because they didn't have the science to know how the world works, so they looked at religion, and religion was based a lot on archetypes, I think, from what I understand, and it was showing you, like, someone who was good and how they lived life, and that's like an example to follow.
How they perceived someone good, because in the 14th century, perceiving someone as good was perceiving somebody who would kill his neighbor for his daughter that committed adultery, or for burning at the stake somebody. Relative morality good. Has changed a lot.
Definitely, and we've definitely gotten away, which is good. But the fact that we can't get away from the archetypes that are still there, but we kind of ignore them as a society, might have like negative side effects, and probably is,
absolutely,
right? So,
absolutely.
What would those be, if they were happening?
So negative societal effects. Well, first of all, I think it's not just taking away those archetypes. It's understanding the way they work and kind of working around them.
Before you jump into the negative side effects, like, are we ignoring them in society?
I think essentially as a society we're ignoring them because a lot of the urges that are repressed, kind of what happens is that they just go into a deeper state and they bubble they bubble deeper into a human being, and it causes an outburst after, right?
Sure.
Violence has always been one of the traits human beings have like tried to repress as much as possible, and I'm not saying to be violent at all. I think that reducing violence as much as possible is something that should be done in society, and I don't think that you should physically assault other people. But at the same time, human beings have never been more sedentary, right? So we're sitting in offices, we're sitting in cubicles, we're sitting in front of computers, in front of TVs, and we have all these repressed urges to move and to physically exert ourselves.
To hunt, to have a bear attacking you, or to have Vikings coming to attack your village.
Exactly. To have that movement, and we're repressing it more and more, and depression rates are going up, drug use is going up. Even, lifespan is going down because of that, and it's like...
Well, we're missing out on the actual fear that we used to feel from real threats. The fear is still there, and we still feel that in like a lot of people still
Right.
fear this fear and this anxiety on a daily basis, although they don't need to, because although those external threats are no longer there, but they're not releasing the energy, that
Right,
negative
exactly.
energy, because they're just sitting around. So
Right.
they've gotta, like, that's why I think like working out or doing any physical
Just
activity
anything
is really good, right?
just that makes you move. And to go in even more deeper into that subject, we're getting much better at programming AI, and AI is something very intelligent. And what's going to happen is that AI is going to be able to produce itself at some point, and it's going to become so intelligent, potentially so intelligent, if we're not able to control it and keep our values aligned with it, that we're going to have to keep up with AI's intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And by doing that, we're going to have to do more and more, like stuff like virtual reality, stuff like, implanting ourselves with chips, or, stuff that we wouldn't have done before, but that's still, because we still have our mammalian brain and our reptilian brain, that it's deeply entrenched in
so we feel
who
like
we
we'll
are.
have to keep up because we want to be at the top of the global sort of animal dominance hierarchy.
Yeah, exactly. And another interesting phenomenon is food and eating, for example. So you take food, you need food to survive, you needed to cook food to be able to survive, the fire was invented, you created food. But what happens, for example, if we want to go in the highest moral plane possible, there is technically no moral argument for eating meat, for example, right? There may be a health argument, but putting that aside, if we want to be the highest moral beings possible, we would not consume meat, and because first of all, it hurts the environment a lot, and it produces unnecessary suffering, right?
Okay.
And by understanding that, but we still do it. We still do it because we need to, and because we haven't gotten to that point where we're able to control that urge that comes deep from our person.
So you're saying people can't be at that highest moral standard because of urges?
I think that I think that for the majority of people, because they haven't considered these ideas, and because they're not aware of archetypes, and they're not aware of certain ways of thinking and what shapes their being and the way they act, they don't consider things like veganism and vegetarianism. And I am one of those people. I'm not taking any credit for being a vegetarian or a vegan or anything like that.
Are you?
No, I was a vegetarian for a year, and it was a good experience. Well, for the moral aspect mostly, and also for the environmental aspect. It's pretty bad for the environment, because look, at the end of the day, you're a fourth dimensional being living in a third dimensional world, right?
Yeah.
So everything that's created is destroyed, right? So if you consume something, you're gonna leave it out somewhere, and that's the ultimate conundrum, you can say, for the human being, is that they need to balance the effect that they have on their environment, the positive effect, the acute positive effect that they have on their environment, and they want to minimize the negative effect that they have on their environment while maximizing the positive effect.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, give me a minute here, but I'm having a little trouble seeing the connection between the highest moral good and understanding archetypes, and then not wanting to eat meat. Because what we said earlier at the beginning was, when you have a large population, and over vast spans of time, you begin to see certain traits continuously come up, and those traits end up becoming archetypes that kind of define the majority of society, and the majority of the people within society, right? Mm-hmm. And these archetypes are kind of biologically and societally entrenched, right?
Yeah, in your mind. Yeah.
And how will understanding that we're driven by these archetypes, does that make you want to not allow yourself to be driven by them? So that you're like, wait a minute, I don't actually need to eat meat. It's just this desire that's been built in me for thousands of years.
So it's raising awareness. And by raising awareness as a third dimensional being, you're raising awareness to the effect. That's your ability to realize that you have a moral impact on the world. But more importantly, that you have that your moral philosophy should be shaped to minimize the negative impact you have on the world,
and a lot of the needs that you feel that you have in that society
that
tells
you don't
that you
necessarily
exactly
have.
You don't actually have those needs.
Exactly.
So then most of society is kind of just standing on a little bit of bullshit.
Yeah, just kind of going.
Well, it's not really bullshit because it's working.
I mean, it's working.
It just
I don't
depends
know
if
what
we
you
care.
mean.
Like, should we care about the world?
I think that we should care. Yeah, I think we should care, and I think that love is one of the best answers to the world, and that if my goal as a human being is to make sure that my race progress, so that the human being progresses, because we don't know if in 1,000 years we're going to be able to be living among the stars and, you know, collect the energy and live thousands of years and, you know, go from different nebulas or go to different universes. You know, we have no conception of what that is and what possibilities would be there. Look back 500 years. You talk to anybody that was there 500 years ago, they would go nuts. You bring them in their world. Just the fact that we went to class together in like the 11th century, and everybody was sitting together, and everybody was more or less, you know, using the same guidelines, the same moral guidelines, sitting down, raising your hand when you have a question, taking notes, not freaking screaming.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like,
so there's these.
You were just going like clapping your hands for a little bit, and we were on our computers, not looking at the teacher, not really giving a bit of a shit.
Yeah, well, those are just indirect consequences of us following those moral guidelines. You know,
yeah, and
I went on my computer because I would rather be doing that and not annoying the whole class, rather than, I don't know, getting up, starting screaming or starting singing, putting some music on. So that's the underlying moral landscape that we follow depending on the environment we're in.
Sure. Right? So the moral landscape changes.
It changes, over time. And it's based, but it's still always based on archetypes.
So should we go into a little more detail about what archetypes are? Because we throw the word around a lot. Let's nail it down a little bit so that there's more of a, because we've just been saying it.
I'm gonna need a good 2 minutes to explain this idea. So
I'm gonna, if I have a question.
Oh, just shoot it.
Just for clarification.
Just shoot it. But I'm gonna need a good minute or two to address this point. So, the human being moral landscape has been shaped through time, through the idea of evolution, based on certain needs such as reproduction and survival. And through time, those moral needs have been entrenched in our neural patterns and our ability to act out in our environment. Yeah. And because those moral patterns have happened over hundreds of millions of years and tens of billions of humans, they're deeply entrenched into each and every human. Mm-hmm. And every lives out that morality.
So there's like a guideline that makes every human the same, and then we change.
It's sort of like building a foundation for a house. So everybody has that same foundation because everybody agrees on a certain types of norms, but it's not like everybody, like, for example, we can use a constructionist point of view for this. Like, let's say, like today, let's take the class idea where we were following, you know, I raise my hand when I speak. Yeah. I'm not screaming in class. I'm respectful towards the teacher. We got taught this. Yeah. But at some point, I don't have to be retaught this at every class. No. At some point, I clicked. I understood. I had my morality. I was like, okay, I don't need to be screaming. If I want to learn, I can be here or I can leave. Yeah. It's my choice.
And it's also, if you do start screaming, everyone else knows that you shouldn't be doing that, and they'll look at you like, what the hell is this guy doing, right? So
if you go crazy, it's exactly. If you go see a movie and you're on your freaking phone or you're watching porn or something, you know, like, that doesn't fit the moral landscape. And because you live upon certain agreed upon norms that you project into your environment.
In order to be part of the society.
Exactly. And that's why our society is so important and is so special, because never in the history of the world has this happened, and that's why
what happened?
The fact that we have a multicultural society that are able to live upon certain norms, even if they come from many different ethnic backgrounds and ethnic cultures.
I think it's not the first time, but it's in the recent human history that we've actually been able to say, okay, this is an archetype, and this is what we're based off of. Before, it was just acting. Right. Now we can actually analyze our acting on a deeper level. Right?
And so that changes. The only way that we were able to do all of this, and the only way that we were able to agree upon these philosophies, is by the understanding of reason. So it is by using reason as a tool that we were able to use an objective reality to shape our common understanding of things. So essentially, it's the ability to reason and your primal instincts that are battling it out constantly.
Yeah.
Right? That's why, for example, there are. I saw. Let's bring it back to the Me Too movement, for instance. I read an article about a pastor who was religious all his life, and he admitted to. Actually, he didn't admit to, but he sexually assaulted a girl, and he got caught 20 years later. But this is somebody who preaches virginity until marriage, right? And these people were not married. So I'm not saying this is a good thing. It's a very, very disgusting thing to do, and that he should be, treated as contemptuously as anybody else who's done the same thing. But he did get that primal instinct, and he did push because he wasn't aware and he didn't have the tools of morality to deal with that situation.
So the primal instinct popped up.
Right, the primal instinct popped up, and he wasn't ready to address it.
Is that an archetype?
That's an archetype.
So the archetype is just fucking rage and sex drive?
No. An archetype is what has formed your patterns of being through time. So whether you think it's good or bad is your notion of what's good and bad, okay? In certain countries in the 1700s, even now, stoning is legal. In the West, stoning is illegal and it's frowned upon.
Illegal.
Illegal and it's frowned upon, yeah. And, in our society, for example, we have freedom of expression and freedom of religion, and we have all these things that have been agreed upon because of reason, which is our tool to fight and to understand archetypes. But in other societies, they're not quite there morally, and you can see the progression. You can see that progression through time, even in our different societies.
Do you think people would be better off if we no longer had these primal archetypal urges pushing us, or do you think that would make us no longer human? We'd be more like machines, and it would kind of ruin the chaos of society.
Okay, so I'm gonna
because the chaos is nice too. Like if everything happens the exact same way every day, the way it should be, it
does
boring,
shape our humanity. It does shape our humanity.
Although I don't think it could ever get there, though. Actually, unless we put technology in our brains like the AI shit.
Right, exactly. So that's the thing is that. But we have tools as humans that we haven't been able to use much. For example, meditation. Meditation increases awareness, and what it does is by focusing on the present moment and focusing on your ability to maintain composure throughout different situations in the world, and by not being caught up in your emotions, that's how you have self-restraint, and that's how you're more aware of those archetypes and more aware of those deeper drives that drive you as a person. It doesn't necessarily mean that those are bad drives, because in certain situations, if I'm being chased by a bear, it's a good thing that I'm able to run a lot faster, and that
because those things are still there. Those threats.
Exactly, those threats are still there. They do still exist, and like the fact that my sympathetic nervous system just like boosts up, and that like my heart starts pumping, and that my pupils dilate, and I start running twice as fast as I normally would, because we all know I can't run 50 meters without getting tired. So. So yeah, like these are very important things to know. Yeah, I'll take some water.
Yeah, there you go.
So these are very important things to know, and it's by understanding them that we can grow as a civilization.
Because we're no longer we have the choice when they kick in. It's like I know what's happening. I can recognize this, and you can almost, depending on the situation, but you can think with a little bit more reason when it does happen versus just allowing something to take over and saying this is me. Because it's not you. Right. Well, it is to a degree. It is you, but it's also
it's a part of you.
It's
a part of you, but it's also to understand that you don't necessarily need to react to those urges, right? You can use those urges. That's being aware.
Will you? If you don't react, will you become?
But that's depressed? The thing. That's the thing. Is that it's by being aware of those urges and seeing that, for example, having sex is very primal, right?
Yeah.
But it's a very good thing, and it's a well-known fact that having sex and having a common partner and having regular sexual encounters will make you much happier as a human.
For most people.
No, generally, yeah, exactly. So there are certain people who remain asexual, and there are those people. But we're talking about for the vast majority of people through multiple populations. Yeah, so essentially, it's that driving psychological factor that's been shaped through biology and through Darwinian perspectives that ends up shaping morality from the ensuing psychological, ground that's been laid out for the human being to survive.
Yeah, and so back to the example that we were talking about earlier, and this was like people that are sitting in offices. They're more sedentary.
Sedentary, yeah.
Yeah, sedentary. They're not moving around as much, and that's causing an increase in depression, lower lifespans, etc. Right?
Exactly.
And that sedentary, it's not in our archetype. Our archetypes are more to be movement, right? Move around, exert energy, because there's threats in the world, and we need to exert energy to stay alive. And we're now ignoring those because we feel like some of these archetypes, maybe we do need to address them and follow them, because without doing so, it's not as good. But then there's some that are bad, like the priest who molests a girl.
Exactly, right?
So it's
if you look at it,
say the good ones from the bad ones.
Yeah, exactly. But everything in moderation, right?
Yeah.
So
balance.
If I'm able to have sex, at a regular interval, I'm going to remain happy because I get those urges and I'm able to address them in a peaceful manner, obviously. Even, people who do BDSM, for example, use violence upon an agreed basis.
Yeah.
Again, moral landscape. So they have code words, they go. But also, you have those extreme examples. You can have very peaceful sex and, it's beautiful and two people are together. But you can also have... for example, very repressed sex. For example, the Catholic pastors and who have molested little boys because they pleaded to virginity all their life. So
do they act like, is that what they do? Is it
I do think that a lot of them have done that, and that they had so much repressed sexual thoughts, and that they weren't letting them flow, that those thoughts became progressively worse and worse because they didn't experience what it is to have human contact. And that, again, is something very psychological.
Do you think there's a lack of, that contact, just like simple touch? Do you think there's a lack of that in society today?
Absolutely. For example,
why?
Mostly because of, I'd say because that we spend more time in front of devices, and that our mediums to be able to address each other and our visual recognition of how people feel is much weaker now because we spend most of our time in front of social media and in front of computers, right? So you have a harder time seeing when somebody's mad just because you've seen less people mad than you would have if you spent your time seeing other people. It's pretty simple, right? That's why when you text people, for example, you don't really know how they feel and you don't really know how to act. So there's a lot of mixed messages that are coming in.
Horrible,
I think I try to stay away from social media as much as possible. Just like last week, I got Snapchat. That lasted about a day.
Yeah.
So because
that's also partially though a customization. You're not used to it, and you're not used to checking it and going on it. So once you have it on your phone for the first little while, you're gonna look at it. You're not even gonna use it. And you're gonna, I don't need this, right? You're gonna delete it. But someone who's had it for a while, they're not going to be able to get rid of it, right? It's like we were saying earlier though with the balance.
Yeah.
And everything has to be in balance and moderation, and it's like the archetypes have to be in balance and moderation, and so do the technology, because it holds people back and it's caused that lack of touch and communication or physical
but
communication.
Yet we're spending more and more time in front of technology,
and we're also because we're getting smarter in certain ways.
Sure, we're getting smarter in tertiary ways, like we're getting more specialized in our sciences, for example. Because we're spending more time as humans, and I think that's something we should do. And I also think that we should spend time in front of computers, and because we can be productive with them. But I also think we should spend time in front of humans as well, because at the end of the day, it's that archetypal mystery that comes to get you that you need physical contact,
Yeah.
and you need to be with other people.
Yeah.
So my takeaway message for today is that everything comes in moderation, and that you need to understand both the constructionist perspective from your birth up to where you are now that shaped your person, but you also have to understand the deeper psychological points that are guiding your behavior and your morality through time, and that by understanding those and understanding that you can control them, there are different ways to do that. You can, use your urge and like use it in a positive manner. For example, if you have a violently physical urge, do boxing, do MMA, just move, find stuff to do. If you have a hard time controlling your emotions, maybe meditation will help you. But there are certain cases, like people who are clinically depressed who do need medication.
But what about the opposite side of that? So there's people who have that aggression, and there's solutions such as going boxing. But like people who are more timid, right? But they still have the archetypal.
We all
pull
do
towards social interactions, right?
Right. So go see more people. Right. Don't get enclosed in your bubble. Be yourself. Be out there. Go.
I think it's good to don't stay comfortable.
Right, exactly.
When you get comfortable, you should try something new, do something different. Right,
exactly. I think the best thing you could do as a human being is to be yourself, but also to understand that the definition of yourself changes, and that there is a certain part of you that's collective to all humans, and that by exposing what you think of yourself to other humans, and by being truthful, and that by pursuing truth, you're going to be able to make your mind better, make your person better, grow in the world, grow as an individual, understand moral perspectives better, understand different perspectives better, and just overall evolve as a human, because that's what morality is understanding multiple perspectives and knowing what is right from wrong.
Yeah.
That was good?
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Right. Well,
some great insight from Frank there, and we're going to kick it off. And
cool. Hopefully we'll do another one soon.
Yeah.
All right. This is nice.
Dude.